All right. Do you know the comedian Ron White? Yeah. Right. I'm Ron White tonight, and you have the fortune of having me with wine in my hand. So whatever you ask is going to give you a big, truthful answer. All right. How do I live longer? That's a good question. But I don't know if you know me for the red wine story. That was about 12, 13 years ago, when we found that red wine, in particular a molecule in red wine called resveratrol, would basically make animals resistant to the effects of a Western high-fat diet and live just as long as an animal that was thin and healthy. We published that, and that was some of the media that I first was exposed to. That was the Barbara Walters interview on 60 Minutes. But sales of red wine went up 30%. Yeah, right. So I've since learned, invest in things that are going to go up in price. No, but that we've come a long way since then, a long, long way. And I'm fortunate you all have a copy of my first book, which is a description of really why we should think about our lives very differently. Most people are going through their lives right now not realizing that they're going to live a lot longer than they think. A lot longer. We look at our grandparents and sometimes our parents and think, okay, that's how long we're going to live. But the truth is that our generations, and even more so our children's generation, and we can talk about our grandkids, what's going to happen is that we're going to continue to live longer and longer. But the real question, and what's most important to me, is are we going to live healthier? Because there's no point in keeping the body alive, which is what modern, quote-unquote, medicine is doing, if it's going to keep our brains the same age, right? And that's what we've been doing. We haven't been very good at keeping our brains young. So my goal is really to, first of all, understand why do we age? How do we slow it down? Is it reversible? And can we keep the whole body younger? And I believe we can. And that's what I'm going to tell you about tonight. So,
because you're 17,
no, I'm actually 75. Yeah. Well, that's a joke. But I'm in my 50s now, so it's getting more and more personal. But I started off this project when I was 4 years old. I know it's hard to believe, but you'll read about the story that my grandmother who raised me, in part, she was a very young grandmother. She had my father, she gave birth to my father when she was 15. So to me, she wasn't a grandmother. She was more like a friend. And she wasn't just young. She wasn't just in her 40s when I was a kid. But she was young at heart. She was so immature and irresponsible. It was excellent. And my mother really didn't appreciate that at all. But I was raised essentially by my grandmother, who taught me a few things in life, which is the reason I'm here today talking to you. The first was, adults screw up everything. And she had lived through World War II and the aftermath, and she thought, wow, humans really can do a lot of bad things. So she said to, little 4-year-old David, you have to do really good things and show humanity the best that they can be. Stay young. 6 is the youngest, the best age. So if you ask my wife, I'm definitely still a kid in my mind. She's the one that makes sure everything runs on time and the kids actually get to school. But it's been great for my career because I'm a scientist, and scientists succeed typically if they stay young. And why is that helpful? Well, it's not the immaturity and the irresponsibility that's helpful. It's the curiosity, the wonder of life. And I've managed to keep that. And I struggle to keep it because the world is a scary and sad place many times. But what I try to do, the secret of my success as a scientist, to share that with you, is the following. I try to imagine what life would look like to an alien. What do I mean by that? I mean that if we can get rid of every preconceived idea, we've never watched a movie, we've never delved into politics, there's no tradition, and we just looked at humanity from above and said, how do they score? Are we a 1 out of 5 or are they a 5 out of 5? I think we're kind of a 2 out of 5 at this point, and we can do a lot better. And one of the things that aliens would do when they looked at us, they would say, well, great, they figured out pi, the numeral pi to 1,000,000 decimal places. Great. Get a gold star for that. They figured out E equals mc squared. That's pretty good. Kind of advancing. What else would be good? Well, they've traveled to a rock that's floating around their planet. Good stuff, guys. But they'd say, well, what about medicine? And we'd say, well, we're tackling this heart disease. It's really bad. And then there's diabetes. We've got to solve that. And they'd say, that's great, but do you know what causes all those things? We'd say, not sure what. And they'd say, aging. Aging is your problem. And we would, right now in our civilization, we'd say, aging? Isn't that just natural? Shouldn't we just deal with that? And they said, the aliens would say, guys and ladies, aging is just as natural as cancer and heart disease and Alzheimer's. Why are you focusing on all those things that kill you while ignoring all the things that cause those things in the first place? So my argument is, why are we focusing on what causes us to fall off the cliff without even talking about, let alone working on, in a big way, what drives us to that edge of the cliff in the first place? And so my mother, she died a few years ago from lung cancer, and I'll be the first person to say lung cancer, and cancer in general, is a great pursuit to solve cancer. But we spend, I think it's about $5 billion a year just on research alone on cancer. But cancer is only part of the story. If you smoke, like my mother did, your chance of getting cancer, lung cancer, goes up by about 5-fold, which is really bad, right? So we try not to smoke. And there's big government campaigns to try and prevent it. But if you go from 20 to 70, your chances of getting lung cancer go up by 500-fold, and nobody's even talking about it. So what's the major killer? It's aging. So my goal with my research at Harvard Medical School, which I've been doing at Harvard for 20 years and 5 years over the road at MIT, is to figure out, why do we age? I mean, does anyone have a clue why we age? Does anyone really, and do any of you think about it? Probably not, right? Because even doctors who treat aging, the gerontologists, they don't think about it either. It's as though we've evolved to not even think about it. And I think the reason is that it's too painful to think about mortality. I mean, let's do a little experiment. And I've never done this before. This is off the cuff. Think about your parents. If they're still alive, that's great. If they're not, imagine that they're still with you. What would you give for an extra month with them, to be able to talk to them, spend time with them, show them what you've been doing, spend time with the grandkids? Those are the important things in life. And we don't even think about our own mortality, typically. It's really quite painful, right? To think that one day, literally, none of this will be around for us and we'll be out of here. That's scary stuff, right? You got the whole what about 100 religions to help us with that. But my book is not a negative message. It's not, oh, let's all freak out because we're going to die. It's more, let's focus on what's going wrong during aging and try and keep all of us, our parents, ourselves, healthier until 90 or 100 or beyond. And the good news is the science, which I'll tell you about tonight, says that it's not about extending lifespan, even though that's the title of the book. It's about extending health span so that you don't have to be sick when you're 70 or 80. And I'll show you that it's very possible with things that we can do today with our lives. And I'm quite happy that I heard some of the right things tonight about what you should be doing. The other great message and inspiring fact is that only 20% of your lifespan and health in old age, 20% is genetic. And we know that because we've studied twins. And twins, there's always a good twin and a bad twin, right? And the bad twin who goes in the sun, who smokes, who doesn't exercise, who eats a lot of food, that twin will age rapidly. Not just be sick, but literally you can measure aging now. I'll tell you about the clock in our bodies. So we know that 80% of our existence and our health is in our own hands. That's great. That's really my message. And one of the reasons I wrote the book is that don't be afraid of aging. Take action, because you really can have a big impact on your own life. And spread the word, because there's really a lot we can do. Fairly simple things to live longer and healthier. All right, so let's see if we can get this. All right. Okay, so this is a picture of a young person and an old person. And when I ask you how long do you want to live, which I will do, think about that. I want you to imagine that some of the technologies that I'm going to talk about tonight and the things you can do will actually work. Okay, so you might have an extra 5 years, 10 years. So my question to you is, it's a multiple choice question, but you get to vote once. Who of you wants to live just to 80 and then pass away? Is 80 enough for you? You are the first audience who has 0 at 80. Fantastic. What that means is either I've convinced you, but I think more importantly, what it says is that you're an audience who's really enjoying life. Why not? If you love life, why would you want it to end? Of course not. As long as you're healthy and enjoying what you're doing, nobody wants to die. If I actually told you you're all 110, and that, imagine we go up to City Hall in Cambridge, and there's someone at the desk, and they made a mistake on your birth certificate. Turns out you're actually 110. You didn't know it. Do you suddenly want to kill yourself? No, of course, right? Just being a certain age doesn't mean you want to die. It's how you feel. How about let's pick another number. Who would like to live beyond 100? Well, that's where I'm going. All right. No, that's okay. But you still got to vote, and then we'll come back. All right. Well, let's jump ahead. What about 150? Does that sound attractive? 150? Okay. So it does depend. So that's where we're going. What about immortality? Yeah. So you must really love what you're doing. All right. So here's the catch. Most people, and you're a cut above most audiences I speak to, I can tell already. Most people say 80 or 100, that's enough. Because they've seen what it looks like to get old. But because I think I prepped you, and I think because you think more deeply than most, we're talking about being 100 and still being able to play tennis and hang out with the great grandkids and live a life like we do today without losing your mind. And that's what we're talking about with the things that I can tell you today and the technologies that are coming very soon. So let me ask you again. Okay, I'm certain none of you have changed your mind about 80, but what about 100? Anybody want to die at 100? Even if you're feeling the same way as you do today? It's enough? You get bored with life, out of here? Okay, that's fair enough. Everyone's choice. And yeah, live and then, yeah. Well, so one of the points I make in my book is that we should have the choice to die when we want to as well. Right? That's just as important to choosing how long you can live. So 100, how about, let's go to 150? Yeah? Maybe? Somewhere in between? 120? What makes you feel that way?
Does everyone live around me seeing all the time, or are my children dead?
Yeah, I pity your parents.
Yeah, what's happening?
Well, I'm going to say that at 150, you look and feel the same way you do today, and so do all your family and friends.
Okay.
So nothing's changed, just the number of candles you have to put on your birthday cake. Is there a date where you don't want to live anymore?
Nothing's changed with that. I think the conditions are violating the laws of thermodynamics.
Yeah.
If nothing, it's that the steady state is something, hypothetically, you might just ask us if you want to live the next moment as it is. That's the same thing as living infinitely with many moments. If it's exactly the same thing, it's kind of like a steady state that's not really consistent with the laws of thermodynamics.
So we can get into the laws of thermodynamics. I'm prepared for that. Psychologically, though, so here's what I'm trying to get at. If you don't feel any different, and you've got a great career, and you're surrounded by family and friends, is there a date when you want to die? Is there a point in life where you just get bored? I've seen every movie. I've done everything I want to do. My bucket list is full. I want to die. Bang. Is there a date? Sounds like, yes, that's fair. That's totally fine. That's some people. So what about immortality under these conditions of continuing? No?
I don't think I want to live forever because you get tired of it all.
Would you?
But under these hypotheses, it seems like it's going to feel the same way.
And what about the population by then?
Now that's a good question.
By then, you're going to be the only person on Earth.
Yeah.
The beauty of life is in the scarcity. Once you have an unlimited amount,
Yeah. Right. Do we only enjoy life and have agency because we know that there's an expiry date? Very Protestant of you.
but then
No.
unfortunately not a Protestant. But
Yeah. No, it's a fair point. But we don't know what it's like to live without fear of death.
But it seems like some of the things that end up doing you in are things that are cumulative, so that they have a low likelihood of doing you in when you're young.
Yeah.
But like if you're talking about, let's say, free radical damage, or some of these things just like are very likely, or very unlikely to reach the threshold that they need to do to be harmful to you when you're young, but
Yep.
are extremely likely to when you get past a certain age.
That's right. But what I've discovered in my lab, which most people don't know unless they've read the book, is we found that there's a backup hard drive of youth in our cells, in our body, that we can tap into and reset the system. And we've reset it once. We maybe can reset it 100 times.
But then do they reset it and put you back when like you're sitting down?
Maybe.
Or
Let's talk about that. We've only done it in mice, but we can reset a mouse pretty quickly and pretty easily and send their age way back. I'll show you how that works.
the same as that jellyfish.
Exactly. So I just got off a plane yesterday from, was it Bottega Marine Labs? I think I'm messing up the name, but it is north of LA. And I was there collecting jellyfish because we're studying jellyfish in the lab, because I think, just like you've proposed, that the secret of reversing aging continually was solved by jellyfish. It was solved by a lot of life forms. Trees do it. They can spawn new offspring. Our bodies have forgotten how to do that. But what you'll read about, hopefully you'll get into the book, is that we figured out that there are 3 genes in the body that if you turn them on again, because they get switched off when we're young, if you turn them on again in an old animal, and probably ourselves, I would guess, we get to experience what it's like to be a jellyfish.
But do the jellyfish still need to be in water, because oceans only have been around for so many billion years, and a billion is nothing compared to infinity.
Let me show you the mouse, because a mouse doesn't have to be in water. I promise.
Yeah.
To tell you, the clicker is not working, but let's plug it in and see if it works. All right, this is the only graph I'm going to show you. All right, but it's a really cool graph. It's a graph of the longest lived countries in the world versus the 19th and 20th century. Yeah, see if we can get that to work. So this is 1840. So the life expectancy, average life expectancy in the best country in the world, right, which is light blue, which is probably, here was Sweden. Cool. I'm jinxed. There we go. We'll get there. All right, so in 1840, the best you could do was in Sweden, and you're at 45 years. 1840. Cholera, you could die from a splinter. Horrible. All right, into the kind of the modern times, 1940. Right, it's still pretty pathetic. Average life expectancy. The best you could do in the world was about 70 years. And this is when we expected to retire at 65 and live another 5 years and drop off. That's not the world we live in, and it's certainly not going to be the world we live in when we're older and when we're in our late retirement. But I want to point out two things. One is that this is very linear, right? That even though we've had advances in vaccines and antibiotics and all of the wonderful medicine, it's almost unbelievable how linear this is. And the second thing I want to point out in this slide is that what these little things are, you can't read them, but these are estimates of the maximum human average lifespan. So for instance, this study here in 1921 said that that's where we're going to stop, that'll be the plateau, and people won't live longer than that. And every time these studies have come out saying we've reached our maximum, they've been wrong. So that's the good news. And we keep breaking it. And you can see the predictions that everyone says we're going to slow down. Now, it's true in the US that we're not going up dramatically currently. But that's not because of educated people with access to healthcare. It's because it's offset by people who are addicted to opioids and other issues, not to mention obesity being an epidemic. But that's not most of the people in this town, really. And I do get to, in the book, I talk about how there's a disparity, especially in the US, between those who know what to do to be healthy and live longer and those who are trapped in a cycle where their lifespans are, basically down here. And that's why the US lifespan is what it is. But that's the average, and not everybody is average. Most people are not average. Yeah.
But there have been humans around for, I'm talking about, for at least 50,000 years, and their bloodlines must have been almost flat for like most of the time. So it is.
Yep.
So it's like maybe this one's just gonna level out and be flat for another 50,000 years or more.
Well, it could, but we're no longer at the whim of evolution. We innovate. Okay, what about this room is natural? Give me one thing. The wood? There's a plant. Cool, all right. So yeah, we probably have a natural maximum. Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing natural, seriously. I was once on a plane with a guy who was flying with me to Tokyo. And I told him that we're working on aging and trying to make people live healthier for longer. And he goes, I don't know, that doesn't sound natural. I said, are you kidding me? We're drinking gin and tonics, we're texting our partners, we're watching movies 10,000 feet above the ground. Don't give me what's natural. So the point is that we can engineer our way out of things. And we're already way beyond our natural lifespan. All right. The minute we killed off all the wild animals in this town, that's a good start.
So some of these kind of age increases, either from like the 1800s or whatnot,
Yeah.
a lot of them don't necessarily adjust for like infant mortality rates, which is why they say that a lot of them, their actual age we live past certain like teenage years is actually much higher than if you look at kind of overall population. So is this adjusted for some of those external factors?
Yeah, so my understanding of this graph is that this is life expectancy, not average lifespan, so that it discounts early childhood death. But it's a good point, which is that initially most of the gains in average lifespan were at the lower end of life. And most of us can expect to live, if we're lucky enough, to get through our 40s, 50s, and 60s. So we're coming up against the limit, which is aging. Okay, so that, we can study childhood diseases a lot, and I think that's worthy, but most of us now get to be old, and that's what the biggest problem on the planet. So right now, as of last year, there are more people on Earth who are over 65 than under the age of 5, and that's the first time ever in human history, and it's only going to continue to widen. So our problem as a species is, what are we going to do with all the people who are frail and cannot work and have to go to a nursing home, that's a lot of money. We already spend in the US 17% of our GDP taking care mostly of the sick and the elderly, and it's only going to get worse unless we do something about it. So we really have two futures. One is, let's just forget about aging and we'll just deal with a lot of sick people who spend more and more of their percent of their lives being looked after. Or we can say, this is a problem, let's figure it out and let's fix it, which is what we've done for everything. That's why we wear clothes and we're indoors in a heated building. So hopefully I've convinced you, at least you've seen my argument, that it's natural, therefore acceptable. That argument should be thrown out the window. We've never as a species accepted things that have caused us pain or difficulty just because they're natural. I'm also going to tell you that there's no one solution to aging. You might read about it. It's not true. I'm one of the world's leading scientists in the study of longevity. We don't call it anti-aging because that's a bad word, because there are a lot of people out there saying, I've got your anti-aging treatment. What we're trying to figure out is, are there genes that control the aging process, and are there things we could do to turn them on in our daily lives, and eventually with medicines. And there are actually some medicines, some things that I take right now, which when you go home you can skip to page 304 and read all about. That's the cheat sheet. But those things we've learned through really hardcore world-leading science. So you may not know that there have been at least one, you could argue 2 Nobel Prizes awarded for aging research already. One was the telomeres. You know about telomeres, the ends of chromosomes, how those get extended. And the other one is about protein misfolding, called autophagy, the clearance of these bad proteins. Those 2 things led to a Nobel Prize, and I'm sure there's going to be more Nobel Prizes awarded for other aspects of aging. All right, so this is the anti-aging. If you go online, you will be completely depressed. And why do I say that? Because you don't know what to believe. People are saying, take this pill, take that pill, this pill works. David Sinclair says so. It's all wrong. I don't say any product works. But you know, this is the world we live in. We have a world of pharmaceuticals which are essentially proven to work, and a world of supplements which are not proven to work. But there's some academics like me that have maybe treated a mouse, so it looks kind of interesting. And what's difficult about the world that I'm in is that I'm trying to do the hardcore research and make the medicines, but every day, understandably, I'm asked by people, well, that's great about the medicines, but I'm getting old right now. What can I do now? And so I've written the book, which covers both angles. What are the medicines that are in the pipeline? What are the medicines you could get prescribed right now that would slow aging, we think? But also, what can you do in your daily lives that you don't need a doctor to do? I want to bring up antioxidants. So, you know, I hope I don't get sued for saying this, but antioxidants have been extremely disappointing in the aging field. Longevity, not anti-aging field. Why is that? Because there's a lot of things going wrong in the body besides free radical damage. It was a good story. It made some sense, and all fables are built on things that make sense, but doesn't mean they're true. And antioxidants actually have been a large failure in the aging field. And we haven't had a lot of success treating animals with antioxidants and making them live healthier or longer. And even antioxidants are healthy for you.
Like blueberries? Are antioxidants?
Yeah, all right.
So when you say antioxidants, what are you talking about?
All right, so we've figured out that the molecules that some companies I won't name say are fantastic for you are actually working through a different mechanism, which I'll tell you about. All right.
So you're not talking about the natural fruits?
Oh, I definitely believe in the plant molecules, and that's a whole story, but I'll get to it. And if I don't, ask me at the end. Yep. But antioxidants, unfortunately, not the cure to aging. right? Or we'd all be living to 150 at this point, or at least some of us who are eating a lot of blueberries and drinking Pom Wonderful every day. You know, I'm not saying they're bad for you, but I'm reminding you that we know a lot more, but people don't know about it yet. Yeah, I'll leave it there, but I'll come back. So this is what scientists believe are the main causes of aging. These are called the hallmarks of aging, and there are 8 or 9 depending on which continent you come from. And some of these you've probably heard of, right? They make it into the public's perception of what we work on. There is, well, let's see, cellular senescence. How many of you have heard of senescence before? A few? Yeah, so what this is that cells will become old and lose their identity, and they'll check out and they'll just sit there. And that would be not so bad if it wasn't for the fact that these senescent cells, or sometimes we call them the zombie cells, they start putting out all these other signals in the cell or outside of the cell that make other cells sick. So even though if you don't have a lot of senescent cells in your body, even if it's only a few percent, they will basically cause the rest of your body to become inflamed and aged as well. And we know that mostly from mouse experiments where you put a few senescent cells, a little dab of senescent cells in the animal, and the whole animal gets old. So they're horrible. So we don't want zombie cells. We don't want to run out of stem cells. DNA damage, genome instability, so that's a picture of DNA we've known about for many years. Telomeres, the ends of chromosomes, get shorter. And, you know, it goes on and on and on. But here's the point. This was 10 years ago, and the field of aging research, we felt pretty good about ourselves. We said, yeah, we figured this out. Put a flag in the ground, we've done this. We figured out what causes aging. And everyone, with very few exception, has started or done focused their lab on this one. Or there's a purple lab, and there's a green lab, and there's a red lab. But I've always believed that you can simplify everything. I'm a reductionist. And I think eventually we can reduce aging down to a single equation. And I could even write it out for you if I had a whiteboard. And I'll tell you what that is. Aging is essentially what's driving all of these things is a loss of information. Okay? We live in an information age. We know what happens when you lose information. We used to lose emails. We don't anymore, and I'll explain why. But information is key. And when we're born, we have all this great information that we got from our parents and what we ate, what we absorbed in the womb, and how our mother was eating and feeling. That's information. And what we've discovered in my lab is that over time, what's happening to cause all of those things on that pie chart is just one major thing, and that's the loss of information in the cell. Okay. So what kind of information? I'm glad you asked. I'll tell you. So there are 2 types of information in biology. The one you all know about is DNA, genetic information. It's a great way to store information. In fact, you can get information out of a fossil. I can go to a mummy and see that mummy's DNA. That's a very robust way to store information. It's way better than a compact disc or a hard drive. They wouldn't last thousands of years, would they? So DNA is a great storage of information. And the reason it's particularly impressive in terms of the biological system is that it's one of the few things in our body that's digital. And we all know digital is better. It's the reason we converted from analog in the first place. We don't use cassette tapes anymore for a good reason, because analog information sucks. Anyone who's had, is old enough to have cassette tapes or record player or records knows that you can lose information pretty easily if it's stored in analog. But DNA, it's digital. A, T, C, G, that's a digital code. It's not binary, it's quaternary. So what is it about the body's information that gets lost over time? Turns out we used to think it was the digital information that we lost. Right? How many of you, I'm sure all of you have heard, I won't even ask you, We've all heard that mutations drive aging. We're losing genetic information as we get older. The problem with that is that you can delete a lot of genetic information in animals and they don't age. It's also true that very few mutations can be found in our old bodies. The smoking gun just isn't there. And what happened to the field a few years ago was we had no clue what was driving aging at the fundamental level, because the old idea of free radical damage and mutations was out the window. We had nothing to replace it with. And so what I've proposed in the book and in some recent publications, and some that are just about to come out, is a radical new theory that the other type of information is what we lose over time. It's the analog information in the body. And that's not very stable at all. So what's the analog information? It's this green stuff. This is the DNA, the digital, and the packaging of the genome is the analog form of information. But we need analog information because the analog system tells the cell which genes to read. And without knowing which genes to read, a cell is basically a tumor at best, or dead. We need to have these structures that say, read this gene, but bundle up all these others so you don't read those genes. If all cells read every gene, a nerve cell wouldn't be a nerve cell, and a skin cell wouldn't be a skin cell. You need to be able to tell it, only read those 10% of genes and turn off those others. And what we found during aging is that these structures that control how the DNA is packaged, the analog information, which we call the epigenetic information or epigenome, is what gets screwed up with time. Does that make sense? It certainly made a lot of sense to the people in my lab. But just making sense, as I warned you, isn't proof of anything. Right? Most things that make sense are wrong. Well, I won't get into religion, but there's a lot of things that we believe that probably are not true. So what do you do to test this hypothesis? Okay, what do? You have to say, well, if I disrupt the analog information, if I accelerate that process, what should happen? Well, we should get aging. We should accelerate that process. The converse should be true. If I can regain the epigenome, the analog information, we should get younger. And that's what we've been doing for 10 years in my lab. But most of the world doesn't know about it yet because we haven't published it. But it will come out next year. So you get a sneak preview. And it was also fortunate I was writing a book while we made these discoveries. So I said, screw it, it's going in the book. So for the first time, probably since a long time, a scientist's biggest discovery is in a book that you can read about before scientists have actually had a chance to have it published. All right, so there's that. Another analogy that I think is appropriate here is a compact disc. Now, when I teach high school students, I have to tell them what a compact disc is. We used to put music and movies on these things, but it's the best analogy I can give you. So our genome is the music that's encoded in these ones and zeros, and as we get older, we're getting scratched up. So that the music it's skipping, and the cell, by this analogy, is not reading the right songs at the right time. And if this were a cell, this cell would not be behaving well. It would be losing its identity. If it was a nerve cell, it might be thinking that it's more like a skin cell. Liver cell isn't behaving. Cardiovascular system is forgetting how to be a cardiovascular system. And that's why we get sick as we get older, I believe. And all of these symptoms of aging and these diseases that we try to treat, but too late, I think are because our cells have lost their ability to read the genes at the right time in the right place. And that we essentially had really good evidence for the last 7 years in my lab. And I'll show you that data. But what if we could remove those scratches? Wouldn't that be amazing? What if the cell could now go back and read the right genes? And we didn't know that was possible until recently. But turns out, as I said, there's a backup of these, of this original state. So we can polish. All right, I have a movie to show you. So one of the things that happens on the chromosome that disrupts the cell's identity and the ability to read the genes is a broken chromosome. Okay, wherever you see that flash, the chromosome is being broken. And when you break a chromosome, a cell gets really nervous because it's actually the worst thing you can do to a cell, because if a cell doesn't repair a chromosome, it'll die or it'll become a tumor. You got to fix it, no question. You cannot live with broken chromosomes. So what I showed you in that video, those balls, are proteins in the cell that we've discovered when I was over at MIT and now and more recently in my lab. These proteins are what we call longevity enzymes. They're encoded by longevity genes. And when we turn them on, the animal's very healthy. They're great. We have mice that live longer. And we think in our bodies they keep us young. But unfortunately, they have two functions. The first function is really important. It's to maintain the structure of the epigenome, to keep us young. So that's great. When we're young, these proteins are in the right place. They're sitting on the right genes. And so the genes that should be on are on, and the genes that should be off are off. But as I showed you in this video, their other role is that they get distracted by broken DNA. Okay, if you go out in the sun and you get sunburned, you broke a lot of DNA, unfortunately. So these proteins are moving from where they should be in a panic to try and repair the DNA. There's a reason for that. I think that that they're moving because they're telling the cell there's an emergency, you got to fight, you got to survive. But if you keep doing that, as I showed, so this is an acceleration of what I think happens during aging. Let's have a look again. These proteins are perfectly aligned. Then they get distracted by the break. They go back to where they came from. They go to the break. They go back to where they came from. They go to the break. Whoops, didn't go back. Whoops, didn't go back. So this is aging, I believe. And we can test this. We can create this in the lab, in an animal, and ask what happens. And we've done that. It's taken us 10 years. I'll tell you a little bit about these guys. These are called sirtuins. And they're a major class of longevity gene that's found in all life, plants, animals, in our bodies. We have 7 of these genes. And without them, we're in real trouble. We don't regulate our genes well, and we don't repair broken DNA very well. So people who don't have sirtuins essentially die when they're very young. Oh. Did everyone on the video lose what I said? So these genes are called sirtuins that we've worked on. And it's pretty interesting when you think about why they're called sirtuins. And you probably don't know. The first 3 letters of sirtuin is SIR, and that stands for silent, which means turn the genes off, silence them. Information regulator. Okay, so in the name of these genes has been the answer all along, I believe. Information regulation is the key to longevity, but breaking DNA is one of the things that accelerates aging because it distracts them, and eventually, like opening and regifting a present 1,000 times, it's going to be pretty ugly by that point. But the question that I've been asking myself in the lab for the last few years is there a treatment you can give to a cell or an old animal or eventually an old person that can go from there back to frame 1 and get them to go back to where they came from so that the cell reads the right genes to be a neuron, a young, healthy neuron, or a young skin cell. And I think we found that. So here's the experiment in the lab where we scratched the DVD, scratched the CD. This is a control mouse that's, at this point, it would be 16 months old. And we took one of its brothers or sisters, and we scratched his DVD. what we actually did was we cut the chromosome in a few places, distracted the proteins, and they ended up getting older. Okay, and you might say, well, that looks like a sick mouse, but David, how do you know it's old? Well, it certainly looks old. It's got gray hair, it's got wrinkled skin, it's lost its hair loss. Mice lose their hair when they get older. But that's not proof of anything. Anybody can create a mouse looking like this. Maybe if you microwave a mouse, they look like that. I don't know. Don't do that at home. I'm joking. So what we did was we studied these mice for years to find out how much do they look like real aging. And they look like real aging. We've sent mice to hundreds of researchers around the world, to experts on the kidney, on the skin, on the bone, on the eyesight, on the hearing. And they look at the tissues and they say, yeah, that's old. And I have to say, they're not old. We've given them aging. But there's really been a breakthrough in the last few years in our ability to really know if that mouse is older or not. Not just by looking at it, but by measuring its age. And we no longer, in my field, count age by candles. We can actually count the age biologically because there's a clock that ticks over in mice, in whales, in bats, and in our own body, which we can measure. In fact, if I took your blood back to my lab within a few days and a fair bit of money, I could tell you exactly how old you are biologically and predict within a matter of months when you're going to die using this clock. But don't freak out because we can change the trajectory. We can slow it down. So here's the clock. This is the DNA, right? There's the A, C, T, C. So C chemicals in DNA, the cytosines, they get modified by a chemical called a methyl. And a methyl is just carbon, hydrogen, hydrogen, hydrogen. It's nothing spectacular. But it's like crust on, I think it's probably a better analogy would be the plaque on your teeth. It's accumulating, and it does so with very predictable way over time in our lifetime. So I can measure your methylation pattern with a DNA sequencer for a few $100, and I could say you're older or younger for your age by this much. And we know that if you smoke, if you don't exercise, if you eat the wrong things, you will be older than the average human and vice versa, right? So this is a new world. And so what we could do with these mice is we could measure their actual biological age. And what you can see from this, okay, I lied. I have another graph, but it's not a very complicated one. Obviously, the one that looks old is older based on this objective measure. It's called the DNA methylation clock. It's also sometimes called the Horvath clock, named after my friend and colleague Stephen Horvath, who actually helped us with this study. Now I'm going to tell you something. You're a smart bunch, so I could tell you something really interesting, but a little bit technical, so stick with me. There are enzymes that remove the plaque off your DNA, called TETs. And they're very important when we're young. They're what allows a nerve cell to become a nerve cell, and a skin cell to be a skin cell, and I think a jellyfish to regenerate. Okay, these are on when we're young, but you don't want these genes on when you're old. It's not a good thing if they're deregulated. But it is possible to remove these. And so I'll get back to that because I think it's part of the understanding of how we can remove those scratches on the CD and reverse aging. So here's where things get really interesting. Can we take that older mouse and make it young again? If we're right about this, we should be able to remove those methyl DNA plaques, and it might actually not just make the mouse appear younger in the lab when you read it, but maybe it would actually behave like it was young. That was the idea. So how do you do that? How do you get the clock to go backwards? Well, I'll tell you that. But first of all, I wanted to tell you about why we chose the nervous system to regenerate, to reverse aging in. Because we could have chosen the skin, could have chosen the liver to reverse aging. But nerve cells become old very quickly. As soon as we're 3 years old, if we damage our eye or we break our back, our spine, we're not going to walk again, we're not going to see again. We know that, right? It's because nerve cells become old very quickly, and they don't act like they were when we were embryos. And so this shows an embryonic nerve growing in the dish. That's great. But as we turn into adults, if you put one of our nerves in a dish, it'll just sit there. It'll try its best to try and grow, but it really won't grow very well. So we thought, what if you could take adult nerve cells, damage them, or even just old nerve cells in the eye, and turn their age back to when they were young? Would they grow and function like they were young again? So how did we decide to do that? Well, there was a Nobel Prize awarded to Shinya Yamanaka from Japan for the discovery that there are a set of 4 genes called the Yamanaka factors that can take an adult cell and turn it into a stem cell. So quite simply, any high school student could take one of your skin cells in your mouth, take it back to my lab or even to the high school lab, put in these 4 genes from Yamanaka, which we call OSK and M for short, and those cells, many of them would become stem cells. Not just normal stem cells, but pluripotent stem cells, meaning they could become any type you want. We could grow a little mini brain in the dish. You can now do that. It's pretty freaky. We'll grow your own mini brain in the dish. I don't think they're conscious, thank goodness. But we could build any tissue, and that was well worthy of a Nobel Prize, right? So we wondered, could we use some aspect of this discovery to reverse aging? So we don't want to take them all the way back to being an embryo or to a stem cell. If we did that, we'd all end up with the world's biggest tumors in our bodies. We wanted to know if we could do partial reversal and just take off the right methyls, pick off just the right plaque on the teeth without taking all your teeth off, which is what Yamanaka did. So we didn't know if it would work. We had some clue because there's a scientist at the Salk Institute that a couple of years ago showed that if you turn on all 4 of these genes in a mouse, it lives 40% longer. But that sounds great until I tell you that every 3 days, if they didn't stop the treatment, the mice would die. So I think he may get the Nobel Prize for this discovery, but it wasn't perfect because those poor mice were hit with these factors and they would almost die, and then they'd let them recover for another 5 days, and they'd hit them again. This is not going to be a medicine anytime soon, but it sure is an interesting proof of principle that you can turn on these things and make an animal live longer. Now, it was a short-lived mouse, so we still have to show that this happens in a regular mouse. But I'll show you what happens in regular mice when you put these factors in. All right. So what I'm showing you for the first time is what it was like to make a discovery of a lifetime. This was the discovery of my lifetime. These are conversations with my student Ryan, who made this discovery. He put the Yamanaka factors, not all 4 of them. He found that 3 were safe and effective. The one at the end, the M, MIC, he left that off because that causes cancer. That's known to be a problem. But OSK, put into the back of the eye, regenerated the optic nerve in these mice. And so what you're seeing are pictures for the first time that he was sending me of regenerating optic nerves in mice. So we had damaged the back of the eye, and here we have the regrowth of something that has no business regrowing in an adult mouse. But it was one of those things where we're kind of celebrating that we've made a big discovery. And I mention it also because when you read the book, you'll get a sense of what it was like to experience such a discovery. So this is it. This is a regular optic nerve that's been damaged. It's been pinched. And the nerves have died off towards the brain. So the brain is out that way, and the eye is over here. And this mouse has lost a lot of its nerves, and it's never going to see again. But in this mouse, in the mouse I'll show you down here, we've reprogrammed its eye to be young again. We've put those 3 Yamanaka factors in, turned them on with just an antibiotic called doxycycline, Now, it doesn't have to be an antibiotic. Sometimes people say, what's so good about the antibiotic? We've just engineered the system so that the antibiotic is the switch, so that we can turn it on and off. It's an easy way. You just give the mice an injection of antibiotic or put it in their water supply. So if we ever have a drug like this, it may be that we get treated with the virus, which is the delivery vehicle, and then we take an antibiotic to turn it on and off at will. So we get reset multiple times. Anyway, let me show you this. This was the result, that most of the nerves here have survived the problem, and they've started to grow towards the brain. We don't know how they know where the brain is. They're not growing up that way. They're growing towards the brain. That's a mystery. But then we did a really cool experiment, which was, if it can make these damaged neurons survive, what about if we give it to just regular, healthy, but old mice? What happens to their vision? And I don't know about you, but I'm now in my 50s and I'm starting to become like old mice. We lose our ability to see. So here's an experiment, and I need to give credit to the lab of Bruce and Meredith Cassandra. They are at Mass Ioneer here in Boston. And what they do is they ignore the feces. This is irrelevant to the experiment. I think if we were handled by giant things, we'd be pretty upset too. But anyway, what they're doing is, so he's standing on the platform, and this mouse is a year old, so those mice actually have become blind. And we know this because when these lines move, they don't watch the lines. It's called the optomotor response. So if I play this for you, you'll see that it's not moving its head. It's really not looking anywhere. And we can videotape this for half an hour. It's not going to see the lines. But if we see moving lines, we're going to move our head. That's just the natural response. So we took mice of the same age. We gave them a virus that carried the 3 genes into the eye, and the virus infected the nerves at the back of the eye in the retina, and they sat there until we gave them the antibiotic doxycycline to turn on those genes. 3 weeks later, after reprogramming their eyes and making them young again, and by the way, we've measured the age of the eye. They do get younger based on the clock. The question was, does it work? Or does the clock change, but that's just like a clock on the wall? You don't really go back in time if you move the hands. Or if you move the hands, does time really go backwards? So this was a really good experiment, and it was a really good day for Bruce. So what Bruce called me about, let me get this started. So it was 10 p.m. at night. It was about a year ago. And he calls me and he says, I'm sorry it's late, but I have to tell you, we just had a really amazing result. And this was the video that he sent me. For the first time in history, we've got mice that have been cured of blindness. That's a mouse that can see. And we've done this on dozens of mice. This isn't just a fluke. Every mouse that gets our treatment gets their vision back. And we can measure the neuronal activity at the back of the eye. And we can see that those nerves before the treatment have no electrical activity. But after reprogramming them, we get the blips back. They work again. And we can read the pattern of genes which are switched on and off. And genes that went off during aging come back on with treatment. And genes that went on by accident, the scratches, come back to normal. So we're truly resetting the epigenome so that cells can be young again and mice that shouldn't be seeing can see again. And we've done this also in glaucoma. Most people have somebody they know, friends or family with glaucoma, pressure in the eye damaging the retina. We've tested mice with that disease and we can restore their vision as well. So our first drug, if all goes well, will be a drug to treat and restore vision in glaucoma patients. All right, I'm now going to switch to more of a practical thing because we're not likely to be treated with a virus anytime soon. It might happen in our lifetimes, let's hope. We're working on pills as well that can reset cells, so it'll be easier than gene therapy. But I'm going to talk about some take-home messages for all of you, because I'm asked this every day. hundreds of emails. What can I do now? Right? Don't show me mice. Show me what I can do. And this is a cheat sheet. There's more of it in the book, page 304. And I'm going to go into each of these in detail in a second. But the summary is, our 3 meals a day, that's craziness. I really don't think we've evolved to eat three full meals a day. Certainly not when we're over the age of, say, 30. So I've always skipped breakfast. I'm starting to skip lunch when I can, and I'm not too stressed. So that sounds pretty brutal, right? But if you drink coffee, tea is fine. You can actually be hungry, and it's not so bad. Lose your breath. You want to, yeah. I do. I'll tell you why. I'll come back to it. Yep. So lose your breath. You want to get on a treadmill or walk up some stairs. Just move. Get a standing desk. Our lifestyles today are just atrocious for particularly this region. Right? We're atrophying around here. I know what you're thinking. No, our muscles are atrophied. Most human beings these days in the Western world, in the developed world, we end up cramping up here. Our muscles are pathetic. It's amazing we can even stand upright after sitting for so long. So there are exercises that I do that I'll highly recommend, because every 19 minutes someone in America will fall over and die from it, and mostly the elderly, of course. But if you've got the strength in your hips and the flexibility, you're less likely to die from a fall. And so the kind of exercises I do I focus on our hip hinge exercise. I'll talk about that in a second. I think we need feedback, because everyone gives up on diets if they don't see it working or they don't know if it's working. Same with supplements, same with sleep. So what I'm recommending and what I do with my life is that I look for feedback. You can't change what you don't measure, basically. And so for over 12 years now, I've been measuring various aspects of my life. It used to be crazy to measure yourself with blood tests and other things. People would say, David, you're too worried about stuff. But actually, we now live in a world where it's very easy to monitor things. For a few $100, you can get one of these. Anyone has an Aura ring on them? They're great. I do recommend these. I don't own any of this company, so I can tell you they're great. This will measure your heart rate, your temperature, your movement, and be a very good feedback about how you're sleeping. So if you're wondering, why do I feel terrible in the morning, this will tell you exactly what happened. And for instance, you can look at your heart rate. And on a bad night, my heart rate will stay high and then drop down about 5 a.m. And that's if I drink more than a glass of alcohol and I have a heavy meal with a steak. So I've learned to try to avoid those things if I want to have a decent day the next day. But if you don't measure it, you don't get the feedback. The other thing that I do is I have a patch under here. Okay, it's becoming more and more common for non-diabetics to measure their blood sugar levels. So blood sugar is a very good predictor of your longevity. The higher, the worse it is. Of course, you can become diabetic, but even without being diabetic, it's still bad. So for the last couple of months, I've stuck a patch on here. There's a tiny little needle. It doesn't hurt. You stick it on there. And so on my phone, I can scan it, and I can tell you what my blood sugar is. I wasn't going to do this, but let's try. So it's called the Libra link, and let's try. So it says ready to scan. Anyone has seen one of these before? Okay, so I stick this here. And that's my blood sugar. So it's in the green zone. I'm happy. You can see that lunch caused, can you see the graph? Lunch caused a big spike. The food that I ate earlier, good to go.
What's the sensitivity or specificity of that thing, the patch?
It's as good as a glucose monitor. So most diabetics are moving away from a finger prick now to just putting one of these on.
I saw it with the commercials with the mom shopping and then they're
Oh, yeah?
Assessing, but I didn't know that they were already in commercial.
Yeah, it's been in Europe for many, many years. In the US, about 2 years. But I do it also because I want to be a role model. I want to be on the forefront of this stuff. But I've learned a lot of things that I didn't realize. And I've also become much more aware of what I stick in my mouth. You know, like most of us, I would just shove stuff in my mouth and forget about it. This was a trash can. But if you see it on your phone, you know, then you're thinking about what's going in. And that alone is fantastic. Makes you much more cognizant about what you eat and, as I mentioned, what you do for sleep. So measure it, yeah?
Do you keep that in when you work out?
I never take it out. It's stuck there in showers, in saunas, in swimming. Yeah, it doesn't come off unless you rip it off. It's stuck there. That's great. For 2 weeks. Well, you can get one from every pharmacy. It's just that you need a doctor to write your prescription. So if you... This one isn't in the book because I've only been doing it for a little while. But LibraLink, there are a couple of brands. LibraLink, yeah. Yeah, I mean, email me if you want.
Yeah. Well, how much time do you expect to accumulate from all of these?
So I honestly, I don't have any expectations. But I do know that people who follow these type of recommendations live an average of 14 years longer than those who don't. All right, hormesis. Did I get through all of those points? Oh, we got through sleep. And this is be content. I think being meditative is good. My rule in life is don't lie because it's just too stressful. You just got to live life being happy with who you are. So I think those are the things. Hormesis is what doesn't kill you, makes you stronger. Unfortunately, we do have to push our bodies or they become complacent. And what we've learned through my lab's research and others is that these longevity genes, these sirtuins, they're only activated, hyperactivated, when your body thinks that it's going to die. Doesn't mean you have to go to the brink of death, but you do need to get out of the chair. You do need to be hungry. You do need to sometimes have fewer amounts of protein because that's what switches on these defensive genes. Okay. And it's worse if you become obese, and it's worse as you get older. Their activity goes down and down and down until basically you're at the whim of entropy. Second law of thermodynamics, you're toast. But we can turn on our body's natural defenses. And the way to do that is basically give yourself a little bit of adversity that may feel uncomfortable. Sure, being out of breath is not great. Being cold and in a sauna, not that comfortable. But what it does is it triggers these defensive responses. If you go too much, of course, if you freeze or you burn or you starve, you're not going to live longer. But a little bit goes a long way. And we know this from many studies. Even plants respond to hormesis. You spray herbicide on a plant a little bit and it will grow better because it turns on these defenses. And we didn't know these defenses existed until just about 20 years ago. So I'll get to the antioxidants because that's an important point. Uh-huh.
And I also want you to get to the part, if you starve your body or you become hungry at points in the day, it decreases your metabolism. Wrong?
Well, calorie restriction, which is the old term for intermittent fasting, is known to actually speed up metabolism. It actually, what happens is your body goes into this defensive state when it's really hungry, particularly for prolonged periods of hunger, maybe not missing a snack, but for a day or two. What happens is the body starts to burn energy, so it'll deplete the fat, and it'll rev up your mitochondria. So the mitochondria, the battery packs, the power packs of the cell, animals that are hungry have more of those than less. So actually, you burn more when you're hungry. It's interesting. We always thought you became tired and lethargic. It's not true. And what we think is going on is that the body thinks that it's under threat. and it gives you more energy to survive. So that's repair your body, have more energy to go find food, run away from a saber-toothed tiger that might be attacking you, right? But unfortunately, modern life, all of the companies whose job is to make us feel better have done a great job of making us feel better. We feel great at the expense of our longevity.
Is there any commercially available ring or patch to measure the level of hormesis to see if you're the right side of that curve?
No, there isn't, unfortunately. You've got to feel it. Yeah. Well, this will tell you that you're hungry, but you don't need that to tell you that. No, unfortunately, there isn't. That would be amazing. That we should work on. There might be a patch that senses things in the blood that can see when things are perfect. Because to get this right, we don't know the perfect mix. The things I told you are my best estimate based on the science and personal experience and epidemiological. But the question is, if you exercise a lot, do you then take the supplement? Or should you be hungry on the days you don't exercise? We don't know the combinations yet, so we have to figure that out. Yeah, it's complex. We're just at the point of understanding what works, but not necessarily in combination. All right, so this is where things get scientific and where I bring in the free radical stuff. These are the three main defenses that you can turn on in your body to live longer. The sirtuins are the ones that we work on, and they require a molecule called NAD to work. Those enzymes, there are 7 I mentioned in the body. So you can turn them on a few ways. You can raise your NAD levels by exercising, being hungry, or taking molecules that raise NAD. The one that I'm taking, page 304, is called NMN, not to be confused with M&Ms. Do not. Well, you can eat M&Ms, you just won't live longer. MIB66 is a drug that we're developing for diseases such as frailty. There are what are called the accelerators. These are the fuel. These are the accelerators. We call these sirtuin activating compounds. Resveratrol, the red wine molecule, is a SIRT1 activator. So that's why when we gave this molecule to mice, they were resistant to obesity because the mice, the bodies of the mice, thought that they were hungry, thought that they were exercised, but they weren't. We just tricked them using the red wine molecule. But we've made some much better molecules. We've actually made 14,000 versions since resveratrol. One of these has gone into humans and actually was, in a small group of people, effective in psoriasis, which is an inflammatory skin condition. So, we've come a long way. We know if we feed these molecules to mice, they live longer. This one even works on mice, the synthetic one. So that's the sirtuins. Again, exercise, being hungry will turn these on. NAD boosters will turn them on. AMPK, that's the middle leg to the stool. This is the one that metformin will activate. Metformin is a drug for type 2 diabetes. It's probably used by at least 50 million people around the world, probably more. It's relatively safe as drugs go. The worst complaint typically is an upset stomach, which you can usually mitigate with food or a coated pill. And it turns on this pathway, which is combining with the sirtuins. These are talking to each other. This evolved to sense the levels of energy in the body. And when you didn't have enough energy in the body, let's say you were really hungry, it would turn on. So these are protective pathways. The last one, the third major one, is called mTOR, which was discovered by David Sabatini at MIT. And it senses how much protein you're taking in. And when you have low amounts of protein, it will defend your body because it thinks that you're running out of food. So these are all hormesis sensors. Bad stuff's happening. These genes get turned on, and they protect you from disease and aging. So what do you want to do? You want to not overload yourself with a ton of protein. So carnivores, I'm sorry, it's not backed up by the data because you're not going to invoke this guy here, mTOR. It doesn't mean you have to avoid meat completely, but it does mean that I think constantly eating meat isn't the right thing to do. Besides, what I like about eating vegetables is you can eat a lot more of them, so you're not hungry. This one you can activate by actually not eating as much food regularly. eat less often, you've got less glucose. As you can tell, I'm monitoring that. And then this one, exercise, also being hungry, and you can boost your NAD with a pill. Now, do we know this is all going to make us live 30 years longer? No, that's why I showed you the slide that, we don't know if this is true or not. But it's been basically done in hundreds of labs. There's thousands of scientific papers. And it's all we've got right now. Those of us who were born in the 20th century, it wasn't our fault. Probably be better to be born now if you wanted the best of medicine. But we have to go with what we've got. And this is the best we've got right now, based on all the science that we've got.
Before you switch that, the metformin,
Yeah.
You would, non-diabetics should take it, which will activate the NPK?
I take it, and I'm not diabetic. I'm not waiting around till I get diabetic. My father is taking metformin. He's borderline diabetic. Yeah, you do. So, but type 2 diabetics. Right. So the data, as you'll read in the book, is really compelling. Type 2 diabetics that go on metformin, people have monitored their other rates of diseases. What happens to the rate of frequency of heart disease, Alzheimer's, frailty, and cancer. And some cancers are reduced by 40% by this one medicine. And those type 2 diabetics are healthier than people that don't even have diabetes. And that's in over 100,000 patients. So I take 500 in the morning and 500 at night So a typical diabetic would take 2 grams. Is that what you recommend for your patients? So I take half that, and my father takes double that.
Are there any studies of considerable populations, most of sugar on 3 boxes, like wet wine drinking and diabetic vegans or something?
Yeah, right. So there are the blue zones where people are known to typically live a long time, and one of those places is Okinawa, the island of Okinawa in Japan, and they do all the right things. They're mostly plant-based. They have a little bit of protein. You need protein, so they have a bit of fish, but mostly it's plants. They're very active, so they're exercising a lot, raising their NAD, and they only eat till they're 70% full, and they stop. That's their habit, and they're not exposed to Western hamburger-type food. But the Okinawans who move to Hawaii, they don't live long. It's definitely what they're doing as a lifestyle. So yeah, this all makes sense that we've got this convergence of people who study lifestyle and have said these things make you live longer, and those of us who have studied yeast cells and worms and flies and mice, and we've come to the same conclusion that there are genes that protect us. So what about food? I'll go quickly because I'm sure you got questions. I think eating 3 meals a day is not the right thing. I mentioned that earlier. But if you are hungry in the morning, by all means have breakfast. But try to find a meal that you can go without. For me, it's breakfast. And I actually know that now because I've measured my glucose levels and my body starts to produce a lot of sugar just as I wake up. Not everybody, but some people. I sent my data when it first happened. I said, what's happening? I'm glucose overloaded in my body and I'm not eating anything. So I sent him a picture of that graph. And he said, either your liver is making glucose, you're one of the people that does that, or you've just had sex. So I said, does it count if you dream about it? Anyway, so it's obvious that my body's making glucose. So I don't need to eat breakfast. I've never felt hungry at breakfast. So for me to have breakfast on top of my body making sugar makes no sense at all. I often miss lunch because I'm so busy. Today I had a vegetable soup just because I was stressed out. But that's my lifestyle. I eat normal dinner. If anything, I eat too much at dinner. But I really like that. I do drink red wine. 1 glass of wine a day is not going to hurt anybody, except for the calories, but still worth it in my view. How much red wine would you need to drink to be like these mice that live longer? The bad news is that you'd need to drink about 300, 400 glasses a day. So don't do that. Yeah. Well, some people think that's really good news. But the take-home message is that I think that taking or drinking a glass of red wine for 30 years can have cumulative effects. And it's not just resveratrol that's in red wine. There are other molecules that are beneficial as well. So probably the combination is helpful. And very long-lived people often admit to drinking red wine more than the rest. Why? I'm not sure why they choose to. But why is red wine better? Oh, that's easy to answer. Yeah, because the skins, like you said, the skins have the resveratrol and pulls it out with the alcohol. Actually, most of it is in the actual stem, but we throw that away. In terms of supplements, I have a newsletter if you want to subscribe. I write about this stuff. You can sign up on the website. It's called lifespanbook.com. But often people say, well, where do I get resveratrol if it's not red wine? And I have to be careful because I'm a professor at Harvard Medical School. I'm not a supplement maker. I'm not a supplement seller. And I don't recommend supplements. But I think it's unfair for me to say, this is what the science says, you're on your own. That's not fair either. So what I can say is that there are companies that make resveratrol. Most of them are fine. Look for the really pure ones if you're going to try it. You can get 98% pure or 100% pure resveratrol, and that should be fine. I would just recommend don't keep it out in the light. I store mine in the fridge. I store all my supplements in the fridge, particularly those NAD boosters, the NMN that I mentioned. It's a little known fact, but it's actually quite unstable if you keep it on the shelf for over a few months. But yeah, so I can't mention companies unless you grab me on the side, whatever. But there are a lot of legitimate companies that are making pure resveratrol. It doesn't come from red wine. They purify it from Japanese knotweed, which is everywhere. It's on the roads here, on the side of the road here in Boston. All right, so that's food. We can get into more things about food later. What about the antioxidant? I'll tell you about that. Nope, I'll tell you in a minute. I've got a few more things what to do. Move, walk. Everybody says this, but it's really, really true. But it's also more important to lose your breath. Becoming hypoxic will turn on the sirtuins. Yes? What's wrong with it? Well, so what we think is that when your body has low blood sugar, it will turn on those pathways. Now, if you're eating a snack, which probably has sugar in it, or carbohydrate, you'll basically stop your body from turning on the defenses. Yeah. So think of your body as something that only protects itself when it needs to, and when it doesn't need to, it puts on fat instead for a rainy day, which never comes. So what we want to do is to do the opposite, which is be hungry, and in those periods of hunger, your body will actually be repairing itself. Yeah. Unfortunately, the recommendation from nutritionists, which I disagree with, is that you should never feel hungry. Lots of little snacks throughout the day, which is based on the idea that you don't want to hurt your pancreas, but actually being hungry, if you're not sick, is very helpful. Yeah. Now, I skip a meal or two a day. There are some people who go for 3 days and some people who go for a week without eating. And I would do that if I could. It's pretty painful, though. Has anyone tried intermittent fasting? Any of you? Yeah. Is it okay? Can you do it? Yeah? Not a week, no. Yeah. It's hard. I mean, we want to be full. We don't want to be hungry. It does. So there's a doctor, Peter Attia. Have you heard of him? He's an expert in New York. He does a week. And I don't know how he can do that. Probably because 3 million people are watching him.
How often does he do that?
He does a week fast every quarter.
And then does he do regular intermittent fasting every day where he has an eating window?
Yeah, he does intermittent fasting. But he's using his body as an experiment. So he's mixing it up. Sometimes he'll just go keto. Sometimes he'll do protein. And he's monitoring with finger pricks what's happening to him. So, of course, he has one of these, but he's also got, you can measure ketos in your blood. Yeah. So he's done all that. And he's trying to come up with the right algorithm of what the right combination is. Because if we waited for clinical trials, we'll all be dead. It's expensive and slow. So there are these people on the frontier. I'm kind of on the frontier, but he's one of the major ones who's really pushing it. So that's food. If you want, we can come back. This is the hip exercises that I like to do. It's you don't want to just bend your back. You've got to keep it straight like a rod, and you stick your butt out, and then you lift dumbbells like that. It's pretty annoying, but it's very good. What happened to me writing this book was that I ended up with a permanent cramp in my butt. The piriformis muscle, which is that one there, was seized up, and I couldn't walk. It was permanently painful, and these exercises were the only thing that fixed me. And that's apparently very common with our modern lifestyles. And I think it's going to be great when I get older that I'll have full movement. And back exercises too, so you don't end up with kyphosis like my mother who was walking around like that. What else can you do? Well, this is one of the enjoyable things, actually. I really do like the sauna. And when I was writing the book, my editor said, what about cold therapy? What about heat therapy? And I said, that's not true. That doesn't work. How can that possibly work? But I researched it, and it turns out there's good evidence that saunas are good for you, and increasing evidence that cold plunges are also good for you. And a lot of the evidence is written into the book. So in the back, you'll find there's a lot of endnotes, references that you can look up. A lot of people read the book 2 or 3 times because it's got a lot of information. But I do this every weekend with my son, as we were talking about before. And it's bonding with my 12-year-old son. It's good for the both of us. And especially in winter, it's nothing better than going through this and feeling refreshed, like you've just been out at the beach. So I spend about 15 minutes in the sauna. It's been found that people who do that have lower rates of cardiovascular disease, for example. Though I do point out that one caveat with those studies that I cite is that if you're in hospital or you're in the nursing home, you're probably not going to go to the gym or to the sauna. But that's a caveat. I think it's probably working to turn on those longevity genes. Now, cold plunges, this is all the rage now, right? You can go cryotherapy. Iceman Hoff is a superstar on the internet. Some of the research that we've done has actually shown that cold therapy is good. It turns on some of the sirtuins, the sirtuin genes. Number 3 produces an enzyme that protects the mitochondria, free radical damage. So when you're revving up metabolism by being cold, you're actually helping the cell rid itself of free radicals, but you're also building up what's called brown fat. And if you haven't heard of brown fat, it's because it's a relatively new discovery. So babies have a lot of brown fat and beige fat, but we thought that adults didn't have brown fat. But it turns out we do. And the colder we are, and the more cold we are when we walk outside, the more brown fat we'll have, because it's our thermogenic, our heat-producing fat. And it's very healthy to have it. So I spend more time in the cold these days than I want to. And Boston's a pretty good place to be cold. The other thing that I learned in terms of a biohack is don't always bundle up. And the best place to lose weight and to burn energy is while you sleep. Super easy. Just don't have such thick covers on your bed. Have a sheet. I mean, don't shiver. You got to get a good night's sleep. But being a little cold has actually really been helpful to me. And I think I'm burning off, a few hundred calories, maybe at least 100 calories just by having to be a little cool at night. So that's an easy life hack. This one's a little harder. My son and I jump from the sauna into a 4 degrees Celsius water bath, which feels extremely painful. Does anyone do ice plunges, cold plunge? Tell you what, if it doesn't make me live longer, it sure does make me feel grateful to be alive. My son, actually, Benjamin, he's going for the world record, or at least his own record. I can spend a minute before my body aches, and he's in there for 15 minutes. He says, "What's the problem, Dad?" I don't know. He was born in New England, that's why. All right, metformin we've covered, so I won't go into too much detail. You do need a prescription unless you go to Bangkok or somewhere where you can just buy it in a pharmacy. It comes from a plant that you find throughout Europe. It's just a weed. It's a version of a weed molecule called guanide. And metformin does multiple things. Remember I said it's important to have mTOR modulated. It does that. It controls your glucose. It lowers it. That's why you're prescribing it. But it also has anti-inflammatory action. It inhibits DNA damage, prevents free radicals. It stops cancer. So it's a remarkable molecule. Now, it wasn't developed to be an anti-aging drug. Oops, I should say longevity molecule. But it sure looks like it is one. So that's your best bet, I think, besides all the other things in life that you can do. Now, you might say, well, gosh, how am I going to get it? I don't have diabetes yet. I'm going to have to talk to my doctor about that. So more and more doctors are learning about this. The sales or prescriptions for metformin have gone up 20% in the last few years. And
I can bring you also.
Brilliant. I don't even have a doctor that gives me metformin, though anyway, I'm not recommending it, but I'm telling you that the future is here now, and there are options. All right, this is the one I've been wanting to get to because it gets back to antioxidants. Everybody that I talk to thinks that red wine's good for you and blueberries are good for you because of antioxidants. It's what we've been taught. It's a huge marketing campaign, and it makes sense. The only problem is it's not true. The major benefits of resveratrol are not its antioxidant properties. It's actually not a very good antioxidant in the first place. A lot better ones. What it is, this chemical here, resveratrol, it's actually sensed by our body. I believe our bodies have evolved to sense the plant world. And what we eat is turning on our defenses. So why would the body respond to plant molecules besides food? Well, if you're running out of food, let's say your crops are dehydrated or the berries that you're picking have a terrible infestation of caterpillars. Now, we can see that, but for most of the evolution of animals, they didn't have much of a brain. They couldn't tell that time was going to get tough. So they needed a way to sense when food was going to be scarce. And the best way was to sense the chemicals of plants when they're stressed. So what is resveratrol? It's actually a plant stress survival molecule. When plants are dehydrated or hit with ultraviolet light, too much sun, infected by fungus, they make a ton of resveratrol because they're trying to turn on their sirtuin survival defenses. Plants have sirtuins, right? And I think we've evolved to sense that. And we've just lucked out that we produce a product that concentrates it and preserves it, keeps it away from light, keeps it cool, and keeps out the oxygen. Pretty good luck. Tastes good too. But it's also healthy, and most of the longest lived people in the world drink this stuff. So it's probably good. But we can do better. We can make molecules that are 1,000 times more effective than resveratrol. This is not an antioxidant, but it does the same thing as resveratrol because it activates the SIRT1 enzyme to defend the body. What does SIRT1 do? Remember I said that it's moving around trying to repair DNA and protect the genome and stop the scratches. I think that by drinking these molecules and giving those enzymes more activity, we're actually keeping the cell from becoming scratched. And we know it works in a very accurate way. These molecules bind to the blue region of the enzyme. So an enzyme is just a protein that's doing reactions in the cell. This enzyme will go and tell this gene to be off and while leaving the other one on, right? Remember, it's a silent information regulator. What it does is, remember the original slide where I showed the DNA and then there was that green blob? That green blob is a histone, and that's what wraps up the DNA. And if you were observant, you would have seen that that green thing had little tails swimming off it. Those are called histone tails, and what this enzyme does is that it controls the chemicals that attach to those tails, telling a gene to be silent or a gene to be switched on. And when you don't have enough of this enzyme around, you're old, you're not drinking or eating the right things, your genes will come on when they shouldn't, and that's aging. And so it works by binding here, these molecules bind here, and the enzyme does this. And when it's in this position, it's much more active, and it does its job quicker. All right, we're almost done. This is the NMN, the NAD booster. These are the crystals of it that we're turning into a drug. And this molecule, when you feed it to mice that are old, they can run, in some cases, twice as far, at least 50% further. We had some mice that outran the young mice, and one actually ran over 3 kilometers, and the treadmill stopped. We have little treadmills in the lab, and the treadmill stopped, and the postdoc in the lab called me up and said, "We've got a problem, the treadmill's broken, the experiment's screwed up," and it turns out it was just that the software was never written for a mouse to run that far. So we had to rewrite the software. So we're hoping that in clinical trials we'll see that we can treat a variety of diseases. I mentioned frailty, but it could be a whole bunch of things related to aging that we end up treating. It's in clinical trials. We've tested it for 2 years in people. It seems to be very safe. I apologize for black mice on a black treadmill. There's the mouse. There's the mouse. Do you see it? Can you see a tail? So that's the one on NMN, and that's the one that didn't get any. We just put in their drinking water. They drink it for a few weeks, and 4 weeks, and they become fit. So why are they running further, you might ask? Well, they have more energy, but they also have more blood flow. It's as though they've been exercising, because that's what happens when you exercise. Better blood flow, more energy. And then finally, I just want to just have a glimpse into what the future might look like. I told you we have a gene therapy that can reverse aging in a mouse's eye, but what if it works in people? What if it works in the whole body to reset the age of somebody? I just chose Bill Murray because I like Bill Murray, but you know, he's aged, right, like everybody. But imagine if when we're young we get this injection of the gene therapy, so now we're genetically modified, but the genes are not turned on yet. They're just like in our mice, they're switched off, they're not doing any harm. And then you get to this age, I don't know, how old is Bill Murray now? Would he be 60 or something? Maybe even more. Anyway, you get to a certain age and your doctor says, "I've just measured your biological age. You're actually 85. You're not doing so well, Mr. Sinclair. But I've got something for you. Fortunately, you've got these 3 Yamanaka factors in your body. I'll give you a course of doxycycline to turn on the genes." So you get sent home with basically an antibiotic for Lyme disease, not a problem. Take it for 3 weeks, and imagine, you start to see better. You don't have to hold the menu so far away. You can think better, you're fit, and you even look younger. That's the kind of future that this technology says could be possible. And then I just want to give you an example. This is Exhibit A in my family. We are a group of, at least on my Hungarian side, a group of Ashkenazi Jews that changed their religion in World War II. But we couldn't change our genetics. We have terrible genes. You probably know Ashkenazis are not the healthiest people on the planet. And I'm carrying a bunch of mutations. So I'm not predicted to live a long time. In fact, most men in our family die in their 70s. My grandmother had a stroke in her 30s. Super high cholesterol, right? I'm on huge amounts of Lipitor just to keep my cholesterol down. So we are not a healthy bunch. So my grandmother, she became She was a young at heart, vivacious woman, rebel. I watched her get old. At age 70, she didn't want to go out of the house, and she spent 20 years basically in a state, a vegetative kind of state. That is something that a lot of people expect in their lives. It's pretty normal for us to spend 10 years not wanting to live anymore. Her son, my father, was born 1939. People always get confused about those dates. That how can they be so close? But I've told you. I think she was pregnant at 14. But in any case, my dad, he wasn't expecting to live beyond 70 in a healthy way, just like his mum. He retired at 67. He thought that he would probably end up in a wheelchair like his mum. And he wasn't very happy. He was quite a depressed guy. He's like Winnie the Pooh in... he's like Eeyore in Winnie the Pooh. So he's not a very optimistic guy. If he was here, he'd probably say, the temperature's not very good, and why are we wasting our time? We're all going to die anyway. That kind of attitude in life. And I was there like, no, this is great. We can do this. So anyway, he's a scientist. He is a biochemist. And he saw the research, and he saw that I was still alive after taking a few of these things. And he decided to take it as well. So he's been now on the same regimen as me. Not just those three things, but a few other things as well, including a lot of exercise. Don't get me wrong. There's other things going on. But I'll tell you what, he's now 80. He started a new career. He's gone back to work. He just ordered his dream car. He just got it last week, a Tesla Model 3. And he's optimistic. I can't believe it. I mean, he's looking forward to another 10, 20 years of life. So I'm not saying that this is proof of anything, but I am holding him up as a role model, a beacon of hope for us. And I'll show you some photos from the last 12 months of his life. Right? This is not a typical 80-year-old. He's doing everything he always wanted. We just got back. Here he is. He led the way up the rainforest in Uganda. He took his 5 grandkids up to see the gorillas. And it almost brings a tear to my eye to think about how special that day was. That he got to do that with his grandkids, and my kids got to do that with their grandfather. That's what this is all about. This isn't about us living forever. It's about spending quality time with your family instead of being in a nursing home. So we're very proud of him. We hope he continues. We hope it goes well. And then I just want to finish by saying thank you for getting a copy of the book. I hope you like it. It was a lot of work. I have a co-author. We spent over a year brainstorming how to put this all together. There's philosophy, there's art, there's history, there's science, all in there. So he gets a lot of credit. I drew some cast of characters, so they're in the back too. I actually was trying to use photos of people, and the publisher said, David, you've only got 4 weeks before this has to be done, and none of those photos are allowable because they're copyright protected. And I said, well, what if I talk to people online and get permission? No, because you have to track down who took the photo. I mean, I don't know who took the photo. Right? So I had to draw all these. So most people don't know, but that's one of those inside secrets that I had to draw all these, and I only had a month to draw them. So it was one every day for a month. And there are a lot of really cool people. This is the guy that trained me at MIT. This is the woman who figured out that you could double a worm's lifespan by changing one gene. That's probably a Nobel Prize-worthy discovery. My friend Rafa de Cabo, we spent Thanksgiving with. He's the world's expert in calorie restriction. Neil Barzilai is the world's expert in metformin for aging. He's down in New York. And Shin Amai discovered that NAD is important and NMN are important for the sirtuin. So these are all really cool people. Some people are really ancient. So let's see. We've got some historical figures up here. This is Mr. Yamanaka factors. Eileen Crimmins studies human epidemiology. Anyway, this is so there are illustrations in the book. Did you have a chance to flick through? There are actual illustrations drawn by Katie Delphia. She's a brilliant artist. Examples of her drawings: my childhood in Australia, my grandmother, me at MIT, Benjamin Gompertz, who showed the rate of population decay, why we age, how it evolved, the CD analogy with the cell. I didn't get into this, but you can imagine the epigenome as a landscape of balls landing in valleys, and aging is that the balls move into the wrong valleys. And then metformin, resveratrol, NAD, rapamycin. Does anyone know where rapamycin comes from? Can you see those heads up there? You know where they're from? What's the name of Easter Island? The other name? Rapa Nui. Rapamycin. So it comes from Easter Island. There was bacteria that were found on Easter Island. So I'm done.
Great. David, thank you so much. Very powerful. Excellent.